Good morning, and welcome to your daily news briefing. It's Thursday, June 5th, 2026. I'm glad you're here. There's a lot to get through today: politics on Capitol Hill, some big news out of the Middle East, a scientific breakthrough that sounds like science fiction, treasure hunters at the bottom of the ocean, and we're going to spend some time talking about Broadway, because the Tony Awards are this Sunday and honestly, it's worth your attention. So grab your coffee, let's get into it. Let's start with what happened in the Senate this morning, because it's significant. Senate Republicans passed a $70 billion bill to fund President Trump's immigration crackdown. $70 billion. Now, getting there wasn't smooth. There were real efforts from Democrats, and even some Republicans, to block the bill or at least tie it to votes on a couple of controversial issues. Specifically, there was pushback around Trump's $1.8 billion payout fund and a ballroom project connected to the president. Republicans who had concerns about those ultimately swallowed them and fell in line. The bill passed. Now it heads to the House, which is expected to pass it as well, so this is very likely to become law. It's a massive injection of federal money into immigration enforcement, and it signals just how firmly the Republican Party is behind Trump's agenda on this front, even when individual members have reservations. On the subject of Trump's cabinet taking shape, the president announced he plans to nominate the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, for the permanent position. Now, Blanche is not an unknown figure. He was actually Trump's personal defense attorney, which makes this nomination notable and, for some, controversial. If you're thinking that confirmation in the Senate could get messy, you're right. The expectation is that Blanche will face a bruising confirmation battle. He's a loyalist pick in every sense of the word, and Democrats are going to have a lot to say about putting a former personal attorney into the nation's top law enforcement job. Now, here's a moment that cuts against the party line narrative. 18 House Republicans broke with their leadership and joined Democrats to approve new aid for Ukraine and fresh sanctions on Russia. 18. That's not nothing. Republican leadership has largely been steering away from Ukraine support, so having nearly 24 members cross the aisle on this is a real split. The vote sends a signal that there's still a contingent within the Republican Party that sees supporting Ukraine as the right call, even if it means defying leadership. We'll see how this plays out, whether it's a one-time thing or the beginning of more friction on foreign policy within the party. Staying in Washington, there's a story about the Trump administration's proposal for a 250-foot triumphal arch. A planning commission led by Trump allies advanced the proposal despite an overwhelmingly negative response from the public. Just to put that in perspective, a 250-foot arch would be a massive structure, a monument to, well, it depends who you ask. Supporters see it as a celebration of American greatness. Critics see it as something considerably more troubling. The public made its feelings known, loudly and largely in opposition, and the commission moved it forward anyway. That tension between public opinion and what gets built in Washington is one worth watching. The administration also announced $700 million in new federal funding for the U.S. coal industry. That's a major investment in a fossil fuel sector that has been declining for years, and it runs directly counter to the direction most of the world is heading on energy. The administration has consistently pushed back on renewable energy mandates, and here, with this funding, it's doubling down on coal. And there's a story that's harder to talk about but important to acknowledge. The Times has been tracking a campaign in which the administration has continued to kill people aboard boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. This is an ongoing story of enforcement operations at sea with lethal consequences. The Times has reporters covering this carefully, and it deserves serious attention. Let's turn to a very different kind of Washington story, one involving John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor. Bolton reached a deal to plead guilty to mishandling classified information. The classified information was used in a book he wrote. You may remember the legal battles around that book. Under the deal, he faces up to 5 years in prison. Bolton has been one of Trump's more prominent critics since leaving the administration, which makes this development politically charged regardless of the underlying legal merits. It's a significant moment for someone who was once at the very center of American foreign policy. And the Supreme Court weighed in on something that affects pretty much anyone with a cell phone. The court let stand a ruling that federal regulators can fine Verizon and AT&T millions of dollars for failing to protect customer data. This is a win for consumer protection advocates who argue that telecom companies haven't done enough to safeguard the personal information of their subscribers. The court's decision not to block those fines essentially keeps the regulatory framework intact. Now, let's move to the Middle East, where things took a sharp turn overnight. Less than a day after Israel and Lebanon announced a new ceasefire deal, Hezbollah and Israeli forces had already traded strikes. Less than a day. And Hezbollah's leader came out and said his group rejected the deal outright. So whatever diplomatic progress had been announced and there was real hope around it, it appears to have collapsed almost immediately. Ceasefire negotiations in this region have a painful history of falling apart, and this is another example of how fragile these agreements can be when the parties on the ground don't all feel bound by what's been announced. Also out of Israel, ultra-Orthodox extremists rioted outside a judge's home to protest the country's military draft. Israel has been wrestling with the question of whether ultra-Orthodox men should be required to serve in the military, and that tension has spilled into the streets in a very direct and threatening way. Rioting outside a judge's home is an escalation that reflects just how deeply divisive this issue is within Israeli society. Now, let's talk about something remarkable coming out of the world of science. Scientists at Columbia University have precisely edited the DNA of early human embryos. Let that sink in for a moment. This is a genuine breakthrough, the kind of thing that sounds like it belongs in a science fiction film but is very much real. The research paves the way for what scientists are calling genetically engineered babies, the ability to alter the genetic makeup of a human being before they're even born. The potential applications range from eliminating inherited diseases to, and this is where it gets ethically complicated, selecting for other traits. This is going to raise profound questions about what we're willing to do, what we should be allowed to do, and who gets to decide. It's the kind of story that will be debated in labs, in Congress, in philosophy classrooms, and around dinner tables for years. On a more hopeful note from the health world, scientists have identified a promising strategy to predict and prevent lung cancer. Lung cancer kills more people worldwide than any other type of cancer. More than breast cancer. More than colon cancer. More than any other. So a strategy that could help us get ahead of it, catch it before it becomes deadly, or prevent it from developing, is genuinely life-saving news. The details are still emerging, but the direction of this research is cause for real optimism. Let's go somewhere unexpected now, 2 miles below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. At the bottom of the ocean lies a vast expanse of critical minerals. Nickel, cobalt, manganese, all in the form of fist-sized nodules sitting on the ocean floor. These are the raw materials that go into electric vehicles, weapons systems, all kinds of technology. They're extremely valuable. And they're just sitting there. The problem is getting to them. One company has been testing a solution, a rover that travels 2 miles below the surface and essentially vacuums up these nodules through a very long tube. It sounds almost absurd, but it works. The bigger question, and it's a serious one, is what happens to the deep-sea ecosystem when you do this. Scientists believe there are creatures living in those depths that we haven't even discovered yet. Disturbing the ocean floor at that scale could have consequences we can't fully predict. It's the classic tension between resource extraction and environmental protection, playing out in one of the most remote and least understood places on Earth. Now, let's shift to something a little lighter, a story about politics and relationships that surfaced in Maine. Multiple women who dated Graham Plattner, the Democratic candidate for Senate in Maine, told the New York Times that he was a volatile boyfriend. This is a significant development for a Senate campaign. Plattner is the Democrat hoping to pick up a Senate seat, and this kind of reporting, coming from multiple sources, not just one, is the sort of thing that can reshape a campaign. We'll see how it affects the race in Maine. Let's go to a January 6th story, because there were 2 notable ones today. First, a rioter who pleaded guilty to climbing through a broken window at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, has been hired to work at the Pentagon. A Pentagon spokesman called him a, quote, qualified, patriotic young professional. That framing, patriotic, for someone who was convicted in connection with the Capitol attack is striking, and it reflects a broader shift in how the current administration views the events of that day. Second, a study found that at least 97 of the nearly 1,600 people who were charged in connection with the Capitol riot have been accused of new crimes. That's a significant recidivism number, and it raises questions about both the nature of those charges and the consequences, or lack thereof, that followed the original convictions. Now, as promised, let's spend some time on Broadway. Because this Sunday is the 79th annual Tony Awards, and if you're not already paying attention, you should be. The ceremony airs on CBS at 8 p.m. Eastern and will also stream on Paramount+. The New York Times will be covering it, and the paper's theater reporter, Michael Paulson, who covers Broadway like it's his hometown, has been talking to voters for weeks. He's spoken to about 175 of the roughly 850 people who get to vote on the Tonys. His predictions, built from all those conversations, have been eerily accurate in past years. So who's in the running? The new musicals The Lost Boys and Schmigadoon are at the top of the leaderboard, each with 12 nominations. A revival of the musical Ragtime is close behind with 11. On the play side, Death of a Salesman leads with 9 nominations. The nominees include some remarkable performers: Nathan Lane and Laurie Metcalf from Salesman, John Lithgow from Giant, Daniel Radcliffe from Every Brilliant Thing, Anna Gasteyer from Schmigadoon, and Rachel Dratch from The Rocky Horror Show. That's a genuinely exciting group of people. Now, if you're wondering why you should care about the Tonys even if Broadway isn't really your thing, here's what Michael Paulson says, and I think it's worth sharing. The awards broadcast is the biggest audience Broadway draws at any single moment. It's a marketing event for an entire art form. When the musical numbers performed during the ceremony are good, and sometimes they're very good, they lead directly to ticket sales. The show reminds people of what live theater can offer. And there's something else. Over and over again, people who work in theater today say that watching the Tony Awards as a child is what made them want to pursue that life. It's aspirational in a way that a lot of awards shows have stopped being. If you have a kid who loves performing, or if you yourself ever wondered what it might be like to be on a stage, Sunday night might be worth watching. Let's check in on sports, because there's a lot happening. In the Stanley Cup Finals, the Carolina Hurricanes overcame a 2-goal deficit to defeat the Vegas Golden Knights in overtime. The series is now tied at 1 game apiece. That kind of comeback in a Stanley Cup Finals game is the stuff of playoff legend. It's the kind of hockey that reminds you why people love this sport. At the French Open, it's men's semi-finals day. Alexander Zverev, the favorite, is set to face Jakub Mensik in the first match. These are the semi-finals, so the stakes are as high as they get before the final itself. In college softball, Texas won its second straight Women's College World Series, defeating Texas Tech. Back-to-back national championships. That's a program at the absolute top of its game. And tonight in the NBA Finals, it's Game 2 between the New York Knicks and the San Antonio Spurs. A Times reporter watched Game 1 with Bill Bradley, the Knicks legend and former U.S. Senator, which is a remarkable detail. Victor Wembanyama, by the way, scored 26 points in Game 1 for the Spurs. The Times had to issue a correction on that this morning. They initially attributed those points to Karl Anthony Towns. Worth noting going into tonight's game. A couple of cultural notes before we close. Marjane Satrapi, the pioneering Iranian-French graphic novelist who created Persepolis, the remarkable book that followed a girl through the Islamic Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War, has died at the age of 56. Persepolis helped millions of people around the world understand the lives of ordinary Iranians during a period of enormous upheaval. It was turned into an animated film, it's taught in schools, it's a genuinely important work of literature. Satrapi was 56 years old. That's far too young. Also, Dataland, which bills itself as the first museum dedicated to art generated by artificial intelligence, opens this month in Los Angeles. And Ferdinand the Bull, the beloved children's book character who just wants to sit quietly and smell the flowers, turns 90 this year. And speaking of artificial intelligence, there's an interesting story about ChatGPT's new advertising campaign. The campaign emphasizes humans and actually downplays the technology itself. The thinking seems to be, make AI less scary, more relatable. Whether it works is an open question, but the fact that a company like OpenAI feels it needs to run a humanizing ad campaign tells you something about the public's anxiety around this technology. On a related note, columnist Molly Jongfast writes that young people are right to boo AI at graduation ceremonies and that they should also organize to do something about it. One more number to leave you with, $225. That's the cost to park for the day at the American Dream Mall in East Rutherford, New Jersey, when Brazil and Morocco meet in the World Cup on June 13. The lot is about a mile from MetLife Stadium. You can take NJ Transit instead. A ticket is $98. Big numbers, as the newsletter puts it. Worth planning ahead. That's your morning briefing for Thursday, June 5, 2026. A lot happening out there in Washington, in the Middle East, in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, and on a Broadway stage. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you tomorrow.